let's start off with the graph editor. So this is a really powerful thing for really fine-tuning your animations and stuff. So what I've got here is just 5 little squares, and they all have the same keyframes over here. So if I go to position, well, the same position keyframes that go from the left to the right. So they start in the same place on the X, and then they just move to the other side. So it's the exact same set of positions for the keyframes, but we're using a bunch of cool settings over here to really fine-tune the animations and change how they play. So if I just play back this animation now, you'll see they all behave completely differently. So this is the power of the graph editor. With just 2 keyframes, you can have completely different animations with these things. So if we look at this, the top one over here is using standard keyframes over here. So they're the unedited ones. You can see they've got the little diamond look on them. So that means they're just ordinary linear keyframes. So if I play back the animation, it's just a smooth line from start to end with no change in speed as it's moving. So that's the default keyframing. The next one is if you turned easy ease on each one of those keyframes. So that's where you get the little slowdown at the start and then smooths out and slows down at the end to each keyframe. But then the next ones are where I have tweaked these keyframes using the graph editor. The standard keyframes use what's called linear interpolation. So they just go in basically a straight line from the first keyframe to the second one with no blending or anything like that. So it just goes in a straight line. So basically all the things that I've got over here are being adjusted just with slightly different curves. So that's what the graph editor does. So that allows you to adjust and completely change the way these keyframes look. So if we look at the third one in the middle here, it starts out super slowly and then shlunk, speeds across to the end. And then the second one from the bottom goes really slowly and then super fast at the end. And then the one at the bottom is super fast at the start and then slows down really smoothly at the end. So what I would say is when you're doing an animation, really you can fine-tune everything and make things feel a lot better by just using the graph editor. It's a super powerful thing. So the graph editor is this little button over here. So it looks like a little chart with a graph in it. So if we turn that on, we see this graph over here. So nothing is selected, so we can't see what is showing. So if I select the top one over here, the one with the linear keyframes on it, you'll see what we have over here is just a straight line in the graph. So that means it's the linear stuff, it's a straight line on the graph. So we've got the timeline over here now is replaced by the graph, and we can drag across with a straight line in both the white one over here and this red line over here. So let me just actually make this a little bit easier for you to see. What we should just be seeing is yours probably would just have a white line over here. I'll explain more of the settings just now. If I select the one with the easy ease, you see we've got a little bit of a curve over here. So what this means is this is showing the speed of the object over time. So the linear one is a straight line, so it's going the same speed the entire time and then stops. So you see over here it's saying 250 pixels per second, and then at the end it is going at 0 pixels per second. So that's what the linear does. It is constant speed. So the next one, which was the easy ease, it starts off at 0 speed, goes up to a speed, and then slows down. So it's the same thing as if you remember when we were talking about the motion paths over here. You can see the dots of where it is at each frame with the spacing in there. What we've got here is basically the graph showing It starts out slower and then gets faster and faster and faster, and then slows down, and then gets faster and faster, and then slows down. So the steepness of the graph will be the acceleration, so the change in speed, and then the actual point in the height of the line here is actually how fast it's going. So if I show you the next ones, this one we've got a speed graph which starts super slow and really shallow change in speed, and then suddenly it gets super fast change in speed to the fastest point, and then the exact reverse, and then it slows down. So if we look at this one in the middle here, it's super slow acceleration, and then it goes super fast in the middle, and then super slow on the outside. It's a really nice way to just completely change these keyframes. So if we look at the next one, this is the one that goes, you see it goes super slow, and it's a really gradual acceleration, and then suddenly zhunk, it goes super fast. It's almost going, it's saying 5,000 pixels per second, and then stops immediately. So super slow, and then stops immediately at the end there. And then the next one is just the opposite of that, super fast, and then slows down really quickly. So this is the speed graph we're looking at here, where we're seeing the white lines over here. What we can do then, let me show you how you would actually adjust this. So you see you have to have a specific property selected. Just selecting the layer doesn't show it up in the graph editor. So make sure you select the thing that you want to see the graph of. In this case, we're looking at position. And you'll get that for other things. So you can see that for scale and rotation as well. So the graph editor isn't just for position, it's for any keyframe. Okay, so this is the linear keyframes over here. And what we can do is we can just change how this looks over here. So I'm just grabbing these points over here, and I can adjust these curves like you would like an Illustrator path or something. So what we've got here is we've got a bit where it's starts at 0, and then it quickly moves up, accelerates. So the steeper these lines are vertically, the faster the acceleration is. And then we're going at a almost constant speed, and then decelerating to the end. So if I now play this back, we've got it quickly accelerating, staying the same speed, and then slowing down. Or if we wanted this the other way, where we make it have a little bit of acceleration, so it slowly accelerates and then speeds up. You can completely change these keyframes just by adjusting these points over here. All those things that I showed you were basically just these keyframes just adjusted like that. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you exactly what Easy Ease does. So I'm selecting this plain linear one over here, the ordinary keyframes, and I'm just going to select these points over here. So these points are basically the keyframes. And in the graph editor is where you can actually, there's little buttons over here for turning on Easy. So I've got these selected, and over here you'll see a little icon with a little graph, and that's basically Easy Ease right over there. So you've got Easy Ease in, Easy Ease out. So you can just turn these on point. So if I turn that on, it shows you exactly what Easy Ease does. It just does a smooth in, smooth out change to this. So if you were wondering exactly what Easy Ease does, all it does is make this curve smooth. You get a bunch of different other settings over here. So we can switch them to linear keyframes over here, so that will switch it back to that. You can do the auto Bezier, which will just do smoothing between the things. And you can have hold keyframes. I haven't told you about this before, but a hold keyframe is a keyframe that stays at a value until it gets another value. So I've turned that on over here. Basically, the first keyframe sets a position, and then it will stay in that position until we give it another keyframe, and then it just jumps to that position. So that's what a hold keyframe does. It just jumps after staying in that one place until you get another keyframe for it. So just like the first lesson that we had where we did the bouncing square, what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you how to use the graph editor to make things feel a little bit better. So I'm just going to start off with the position, do the little up, and give us a little down thing. So we've just got a little keyframe of bounce up and down. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to give us a few bounces over here and then use the graph editor to adjust all these different things. Okay, so if I open up the graph editor and select the position, you'll see that we've got funny looking things over here because it's going with linear, so the speed is staying constant, but it's trying to fit in different speeds because these keyframes have different gaps between them. So that's why you get, when you have these gaps, different sizes, you get like different speeds, is because it's trying to do the same motion in a different amount of time. So the speed sort of changes. And you can see over here why you don't have a smooth animation when your keyframes aren't evenly spaced, is because it's trying to do the same sort of thing in different amounts of times. So the speed looks different over here. So if I now go and, like I did with the first lesson with the bounces, is I selected each one of these keyframes where it was in the air, and I put an easy ease on them. I don't know if you remember me doing that, but so I selected those keyframes and I pressed F9 to add the easy ease, so it sort of slows down and speeds up when it gets to that bounce. When we switch to the graph editor, we see things sort of changing over here. So what it does on those keyframes that I've got selected, it slows down to 0 speed in the graph. So there's a little button over here called Fit Graphs to View, and that just fits the graph onto the entire view over here, so you can just see it a little bit. So we've got things that speed up, and then it slows down to 0, and then speeds up. So that's just by adding the easy, we get these little curves fitting on over here. And you'll see that there's a little bit of weirdness going on here because of the way that these keyframes were added. They sort of have different speeds and stuff in different bits. So if we select these bits where it's looking a little bit weird, we can sort of adjust them and fine-tune this animation a bit. So what I'm going to do actually is switch to another view over here. So we've been looking at the speed graph over here. So this is seeing the change in speed over time. If you see over here, there's a little drop-down icon over here for choose graph type and options. So I'm going to switch from the speed to the value graph. So now what this is going to be showing is, instead of the speed, it's going to be showing what the different values in these animations are. So this is position, so it's showing the change in the value of the position. So the animation is the up and down motion of the bounce, and so we've got X and the Y. All we're changing is the Y, and that is the green graph over here, and the X is the red graph. So the X position is not actually changing, but the Y is going up and down. So what we can do is we can change the steepness of the bounce by visually in the graph editor itself, just by dragging the peaks of the Y value over here to make them bigger and smaller. It's just going negative values over here because, remember, Y, if you make it smaller, it goes up. So in the graph editor, we're making them smaller, so they're going lower. Essentially, if I play this back now, the bounce will go highest over here and get lower and lower and lower. So this can also be a nice way, instead of working directly in the viewport over here, you can see things perhaps a little bit easier in the graph because you're sort of seeing the motion over time over here. So we're just seeing the vertical motion as a graph in here. And then we can sort of see, well, we want these timings as well to be a little bit smaller. So we can make them get smaller and smaller each time. So we can, in the graph editor, we can grab and shrink individual keyframes just by selecting them and dragging and squashing and stuff. So it can be a lot easier to manipulate these things than going into here and trying to do the alt select and squash and stuff. So you see now we've got a smooth adjustment of speed ramping down over here. And if I play back this animation, I'm going to bounce faster, but slowing down the height at least. So that feels nice and smooth and a lot more realistic than the first lesson's bounce that we did. And that's just by using the graph editor to change the position values of this bounce. So that's just using the graph editor to change that. So another thing that I want to show you is that you can do powerful things with just the graph editor. Hide this. I'm going to add a new solid layer on here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to add position keyframes on this for just moving from left to right. So what you see, we've got a linear adjustment. So it's going, we're looking at the value graph now, remember. So this is going in a straight line from with the red. So that's the X value over here, moving to the right. So the X value is increasing in the graph as it moves across to the right. It might take a little bit of a while just to get used to working with these different values and what they mean. But basically, the X and the Y are separate graphs, and the red one is the X, and that is just it moving from a lower value to a higher value as time increases. So if I select the keyframe at the end and I press F9 to put easy ease on, you'll see that the graph sort of smooths out as it gets towards that keyframe. So I just pressed F9 to turn that on. You can use the little buttons over here to change that between linear and easy ease. So now if I play this back, we just get the smoothing and it slows down as it gets to that point. But the nice thing about working with the value graph is that we can do some other stuff over here. So if I grab this, okay, so if you turn on the reference graph, when you're on, like, say, the value graph, you can see the speed graph at the same time, or if you're on the speed graph, you can see the value graph at the same time. So that can be useful depending on what you want to see. Bringing in text and stuff like that, so you can get nice sort of smooth motions to a spot. Like if we look at the bottom one over here, if you want to animate in text to slide off screen, you can have it go super fast and then slow down nicely to a point. And really slow movements like that can really feel nice and slick and stuff like that. And of course, you can use these things on like opacity or rotations and stuff. So another useful thing there is if you want to animate each of these with different graphs, so like the position or scale. So if we go to position over here, you can actually say right click on them and you can say separate dimensions. So if we separate that, now we've got the X position and the Y position. So it's not position being X and Y, we've got position X and position Y. So that might be a little bit easier for just separating things out and then animating them separately over there. So we can go now animate just the X position separately and stuff. So these are just a little more advanced tips and tricks for doing different things. You might not always want to have separated positions, but so if I now adjust this graph over here, you see I'm going like making it go upwards. But basically now we've got the position graph over here going smoothly up over here, and then we've actually got it going above the position we want. So if you can imagine what's actually happening over here is it's going to overshoot the position we want and then go back to where we want. So this is a nice way of doing a little overshoot animation. So if I play this back, it animates and then it goes over where we want it and then slides back. So you can make nice little bouncy things with just one keyframe, but it goes over where you want and then comes back to where you want it to go. So we'll overshoot animations as well, can make animations sort of feel fun and sort of organic and bouncy and stuff like that. So that I just did by selecting the keyframe. I turned on easy ease, and then I've got free motion for changing this graph backwards and forwards. So if I actually add another keyframe over here, so let me just add a keyframe over here, we can smooth out this little bounce over here. So we've got a little nice overshoot and bounce back sort of thing. And you can check the speed graph in the back over here. We're seeing sort of how it changes as we've got this happening. So you can just make sure that you don't have weird looking changes in speed in your graph over here. So it goes super slow for a second and bounces back and then slows down again. So the graph editor is really powerful for giving you variety in your motion and changing completely how just simple keyframes can animate. But it will be super powerful for your animations. The graph editor, really, I would stress that you should have tried that, and you can sort of see how just with 2 keyframes you can completely change an animation and have some really cool effects in that. So definitely try that out. Your animations will feel a lot more professional, slick, and sort of cool.